Good evening. I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel, Dan Borenstein, columnist and editorial writer with the Contra Costa Times on Proposition 14, and Paul Rogers, environment writer for the San Jose Mercury News on the measure to overturn AB 32. And Carla Marinucci, political reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle, with an election update. Well, Carla, the GOP candidates squared off last night. Their debate won't be broadcast, though, until Saturday or Sunday.
That's
but
right.
You're here to give us a preview. Tell us what went on.
That's right. I mean, this was the first, the real televised debate between former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina, former Congressman Tom Campbell, and Assemblyman Chuck DeVore of Irvine. And, you know, the topics were all over the map: illegal immigration, the Arizona law, gun rights, offshore oil drilling. It is really coming down to where the polls are standing on this one. And this is going to be a tight one. Right now, it looks like Tom Campbell has the advantage. But, boy, we saw some ads today. The Democrats took off after Carly Fiorina doing a Demon Sheep 2 ad, going off on that classic ad that she did. I think this is going to be a knockdown, drag-out battle, and it's all about who is best to take on Barbara Boxer in the fall. That was the fight last night down in Los Angeles, and what we'll see here in the Bay Area over the weekend. There's a lot of debate among these three candidates about which one of them is best poised, but Fiorina did get an advantage this week. She got that endorsement of Sarah Palin, who is the darling of the Tea Party set. That was the endorsement that Chuck DeVore was hoping he was going to get. So this is a big deal to her.
Chuck DeVore is the conservative. He wants to be known as Mr. Conservative in this.
Well, they all want to be known as Mr. Conservative all the time.
Why didn't he get Sarah Palin's
You know,
nod?
I think Palin was not going to go with Tom Campbell. He's clearly the most moderate in the race, and he's pro-choice to boot. So having to pick between these two, a lot of people feel that Palin is really setting it up. It's her and Mitt Romney all of a sudden have taken a great interest in California, and of course it all goes to the 2012 presidential race.
It's an interesting dynamic that Campbell's out actually right now out in front.
He
is the moderate in this race where everybody's running to the right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan. I mean, here's this, law professor, former dean of the Huss School of Business, soft-spoken guy, but he is really focused on this race and says, he's brought up before, this is the third run he's made for the U.S. Senate, and said the first time around he believes, and just about everybody believes, he could have beaten Barbara Boxer had he made it through that primary. A lot of people think he is the strongest choice. When you look at the polls, he is the strongest choice to go up against Boxer.
So why are the Democrats running ads against Carly Fiorina when Carly Fiorina, by all accounts, would be easier for Boxer to beat because of her history laying people off at Hewlett-Packard, taking a big golden parachute? It's not that popular to have been a Wall Street CEO these days.
Yeah, that's absolutely right,
She
Paul.
seems to have more targets, and Tom Campbell is right in the wheelhouse of where a lot of California voters are.
Absolutely right. Fiorina has money. She's already thrown a couple million into this race, and a lot of people expect she's going to be doing it again. She's one of these wealthy CEOs. Remember that golden parachute she got out of Hewlett-Packard was $46 million. She's got some of that to throw around. She always points out she's not as rich as Meg Whitman.
Yeah, she's not even in the same league, really.
It's a league, okay? And she could throw some money.
Did we learn any more about their positions, for instance, on immigration and the Arizona bill?
You know, all of them
that?
oppose amnesty. They're very strong on that. All of them are signed on, said they would have signed that Arizona law. The interesting difference between them was on the issue of gun rights. They were all asked whether someone who is on the no-fly list should be allowed to possess a gun, and Campbell was the only one to say no. And, of course, he was immediately attacked by the other two for not being strong on the Second Amendment. So we're going to be seeing some more of this as it goes forward, and I think it's a very scrappy race, and a lot is at stake for the Democrats in this race. That seat nationally, the Republicans are looking at Boxer. She has a target on her back nationally. They feel if they can get that seat, that is a critical seat to take back the Senate for the Republicans. So this one is going to matter to them a great deal.
Do you think it's hurt Boxer not to have an opponent, not to be out there, you know, in the news and headlines?
I think it always makes it for a better candidate in some ways, but we're seeing the same dynamic in the governor's race, where Jerry Brown is really out of the picture all of a sudden. I mean, he hasn't said much. He hasn't done.
Statistically, candidates who don't have primary challengers do better because they don't have as many negative ads from their own
this
party.
is exactly right,
They're
Paul.
not
You're right.
bleeding their
I
money
mean,
out,
the
so.
new polls are showing, for instance, in the governor's race. Well, we will go to that. I mean, we're looking at this race where Meg Whitman, the former eBay CEO, is up against Steve Poizner, the state insurance commissioner, and her negatives have just shot through the roof. They're 2-to-1 negative now, and the latest polls show. She had a 50-point margin over Steve Poizner a couple weeks back, and Poizner said this week, and many of the Democrats say, their private polls show, he's anywhere now between 8 to 10 points within shooting distance. I mean, that is an incredible close. We're going to start seeing some public polls on that. The fact is, when a candidate's negatives go up like this in a primary, and this is true in the Senate, it's hard to get them back down again.
I think it's important with the Poizner-Whitman race to keep in mind and in the Bay Area folks may not realize this, but Poizner has been running a lot of TV. It's just we're not seeing it in the Bay Area.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. And this is the only area where he hasn't run ads, and we expect him to start running them very soon.
This could be the last season when we would even worry about a primary in this regards, where there are two parties battling each other. So, Dan, that's your story on Proposition 14, and that's about an open primary.
That's about an open primary, and ironically, this whole concept starts with Tom Campbell back in 1992.
That's right.
But let's first talk about how this would work. Currently what happens is you go in, you get a ballot for your party, in the primary, you pick the candidate from your party, with the exception of independent voters, and the winner from each party moves on to the general. What this would do is give everybody the same ballot, and everybody would be on that ballot, and the top two people, regardless of what party they were in, would move on to the general. This might seem a little familiar to folks.
Because Californians have kind of seen this movie before.
We've seen this movie
several
before.
times.
Yeah, we've seen this movie. We've been through it before. You go back to 1996 when we had a similar open primary measure on the ballot. The difference then was that people were on the ballot by party, and the top vote getter from each party moved on. The parties hated that. They absolutely despised it because they felt like it allowed Republicans to meddle in the Democratic primary, Democrats to meddle in the Republican primary. So they went to the U.S. Supreme Court and said, this violates our First Amendment rights of free association. And the Supreme Court in 2000 said, you're right. So, but what the Supreme Court did at the same time is it laid a roadmap and said, but this is how you can get around it. There's a footnote, basically, in the Supreme Court decision that basically says, here's how to do it, guys.
So the kind of legal challenges,
right.
We're not going to see
We're right. And basically what they said is basically what's on the ballot in this June. Now, if this sounds a little familiar, it's because we've already voted on this one once in 2004, and voters rejected it. But on that one, we had a competing measure, which was pretty confusing to voters. This time, it's sitting by itself.
Now the biggest proponent of this, Abel Maldonado, the lieutenant governor, got this on the ballot as part of the deal last year for his vote to help the budget get through. I guess the question is there any indication yet of how this is polling? Because both parties hate it because it would take away some of the power of the party machines.
And they're going to fight it.
They're going to fight,
you know, moderate types, and most of the state's newspapers generally like it. Do we know yet where the
I don't know exactly how it's polling, but you're right. We're going to see a group of moderate politicians, of business groups. We've got the governor, we've got Maldonado. We're starting to see money filter in to the pro-Prop 14 side. We haven't, we haven't seen much.
Who's that money coming from?
Well, some big business interests are throwing money into it, and Arnold Schwarzenegger is. When he needs money and he puts out the word, money comes in, and money's starting to come in.
I think Hewlett Packard Company has given some money. I think Silicon Valley Leadership Group, I think, has endorsed that. I don't think they've given money yet. But yeah, it's like business groups.
Because what you're talking about is, I mean, all the polls show, the lion's share of the voters say they're in the middle of the political spectrum, and yet we're seeing this in the governor's race and the Senate race. The candidates go to the extreme.
Well, where this really, I think, is aimed more so even than the Senate and Senate race, for
Right,
example.
right.
Because the Senate race, if you think about it, it would make a itty-bitty difference in Congress, because this would be just California's delegation. Where it would really make a big difference is in the state legislature, which I think there is a growing sentiment, certainly that is expanded since 2004, that the legislature is broken. And that there has to be something to do to stop the partisan bickering, to stop the polarization. And we had redistricting 2 years ago that voters approved, and we'll see how that works. That was that was towards the same goal, and this is the next step.
So the combination of these two really.
The combination of these two.
But
right,
Dan,
exactly.
would money still be king in all of this?
Money is still going to be very important, and there's an argument that money may be more important, because what happens is in the June primaries now, you can't just run towards the voters in your party. You have to run towards everyone. You have to attract all the voters across the political spectrum. That means you have to reach more people. That means you have to spend more money. So yes, in that sense, money will continue to be very, very important.
Well, that leads us right to the next topic, and that's AB 32, where money is certainly king and what's going on there. Paul, first of all, explain to us where AB 32, what it is today, because it was passed a few years back. The governor signed it into law a few years back, but now here we are with a measure to kill it.
AB 32 was a bill that Governor Schwarzenegger signed in 2006. It was passed by the Democratic legislature, and what it does is it requires California to emit the same amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in 2020 that it did in 1990. That's a reduction of about 25%, depending on how you cut the numbers. And the State Air Resources Board has been working on the rules on exactly how they're going to do this. They're going to do some kind of cap and trade system rather than an energy tax. But the rules don't kick in until January 1st of 2012. So a lot of big businesses that would be affected, particularly people who make and use a lot of fossil fuels, which emit the greenhouse gases that cause global warming or contribute to it. Oil companies, coal companies, they're very alarmed about this. And just like they tried to stop California's law that reduced greenhouse gas emissions from automobiles and ultimately failed, and President Obama copied that nationally, they're worried that the same thing's going to happen. And California, as it usually does, will be the first actor. The rest of the country will copy this, and there'll be mandatory limits for the first time on greenhouse gas emissions. So what they've done this week on Monday, the opponents of AB 32 turned in 800,000 signatures for a November ballot measure that would say AB 32 will be suspended if this passes until we get 4 quarters in a row of unemployment below 5.5% or below. Right now it's 12.6%. We've only had 3 years in the last 20 years where it's met that threshold. So you talk about gas emissions. The main emissions from this in this election are going to be the emissions from all the money that's going to be burned up in this campaign. The oil companies are going to put tens of millions of dollars, and the enviros, who never have any money, they are now getting Google, Applied Materials, all the Silicon Valley guys, the solar companies. They want to save AB 32 because they believe it doesn't cost jobs for them, that it keeps jobs and creates jobs. What's so interesting
on this is the whole political shift, because when AB 32 was passed, this was hailed with huge ceremony as being such a landmark bill. A lot of public support. In fact, it still is a lot of public support. But yet they got twice as many signatures as needed, and the polls have shifted on this. Paul, how has that happened?
There's 2 issues there. Anybody can get 800,000 signatures for anything if you pay the signature gatherers enough money. This side, there were all these stories about them going to Tea Party rallies and collecting signatures and paying $2 a signature or more to get the signature. So I wouldn't judge that as a grade of anything. But you're right, support for doing something about climate change has dropped in this country. A big reason is because of the economy. We have the worst economy since the Great Depression. And when you talk about something that might raise your PG&E bill, it might raise the price of gasoline. It very well might. People are afraid to do that. And, I think this is the way that this is shaking down is I have this sort of belief that every political issue in America boils down to Texas versus California. And you're either with Texas or you're with California. It could be stem cells, it could be abortion, it could be anything. It's always Texas against California.
But this is also going to be about
Texas
jobs.
Against California.
It's going to be about jobs, right? And aren't there competing studies here that show, yes, we're going to lose millions of jobs, or no, we're not?
There are some studies that say this will cost a lot of jobs, some that say not too many.
The state legislative analyst, which is kind of a middle-of-the-road referee, says it may cost a few, but nobody really knows at this point, because although there's lots of money flowing into solar and wind and computer software that turns off the lights in the building when you go home, all those kind of things, we don't have all the rules written yet, so we can't really game it out that well.
Paul, how much difference does assuming this were to make it, this is going to make it on the ballot.
Yes.
Assuming it's approved, how much difference would it really make?
Well, it's a great question, because California has a lot of other climate change laws, like the one affecting automobiles or a low carbon fuel standard, those kind of things. Those aren't going to go away. We wouldn't have a cap and trade system. And interestingly, the U.S. Senate is about ready to debate a bill that looks just like California's. Lindsey Graham was one of the co-sponsors, a Republican from South Carolina. He pulled out last week because he was mad about some of the immigration stuff that was going on. But the U.S. Senate is going to debate this. The House has already passed a bill very similar to California's. So this issue isn't going away.
This could have a chilling effect, do you think, on Washington and where they're going? If really California, the lead state, overturned their own, had their own legislation overturned?
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it certainly could. I mean, a lot of times, people look to California for leadership on air pollution issues. Every major smog issue, from catalytic converters to smog check to banning unleaded gas, they always start here. And climate change has begun sort of the second wave of that type of emissions regulation. And the car companies freaked out and fought and lost California's automobile law. Now, this is California's stationary source law for power plants, for cement plants, for oil refineries. So there's a lot at stake, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it's interesting to me that George Shultz, the Republican Secretary of State under Reagan, signed on the Save AB 32 campaign. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Dianne Feinstein on the Save AB 32 campaign. So there's a lot of big, powerful people lining up on this. But it could be close. I mean, there's a poll that shows 58% of Californians like this law, but when they see $100 million worth of ads, they might not anymore.
Okay. California and Texas added, and money also is king again.
6 months from now, you'll vote.
That's right. That's on the November ballot.
November 2nd.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.